Italy's top court says it is not always a crime to help somebody kill themselves. A new legal challenge has begun in the UK, where it is against the law. Is it time for a rethink on assisted dying? You're watching Roundtable. Hello from me, David Foster. It is your life, you choose. And if that choice is to take your own life with help, then that's up to you. Or is it? People who help others to die are in most countries treated as criminals, though that may be changing.
Many people with life-changing medical conditions want the legal right to die, to choose when to end their life before their suffering becomes unbearable. Assisted dying is legal in Switzerland, Canada, Australia, the Netherlands and some US states for those with terminal illnesses. Italy's top court recently ruled in favour of assisted dying to be granted to those experiencing intolerable suffering. The campaign group Dignity in Dying is leading the fight to legalise assisted suicide in the UK. They say up to 2,000 terminally ill people a year would opt to end their life if the UK law allowed them to. But it doesn't, so several terminally ill people have travelled to suicide facilities such as Dignitas in Switzerland. People like Richard Selly, before his death in September this year, he called for a change in the law.
If an assisted death was possible in Scotland, I would be able to die at a time of my choosing, at home.
Critics of assisted dying say it could pressure vulnerable people to end their lives, while others oppose it on religious grounds. Some medical experts say the focus should be on improving end-of-life care. So should there be a rethink on assisted dying?
Very pleased to say that with me at the round table we have Dr. Mark Pickering, Chief Exec of the Christian Medical Fellowship. He's opposed to assisted dying. Dr. Amy Prophet with us too from St Christopher's Hospice in London. She opposes assisted dying in favour of better end-of-life care. And Michael Irwin, Dr. Michael Irwin, a veteran campaigner for the legal right to die, and Dr. Jackie Davis, Chair of Healthcare Professionals for Assisted Dying. Listen, 4 doctors, thank you very much. Indeed, we'll get to each one of you in turn. But Michael, if I could come to you first of all. 5 times you've been to Switzerland where there is an assisted dying clinic, Dignitas. You've taken 4 people there to help end their lives. You've been arrested upon return to Britain. You've been headlined as Dr. Death. Do you think attitudes are changing?
Very much so. I mean, various polls will show that at least 80% of people in this country support the idea of a right to die law. And you look at countries in Western Europe like the Netherlands and Luxembourg and Belgium and in Switzerland, it is possible there for people, not only terminally ill, but people suffering unbearably, to have a doctor to help them in their life. Are we so different to the Dutch or the Swiss? Of course not.
Well, Amy, let me put this to you. The important word there is unbearable. Yeah? If people are suffering unbearably, what right does anybody else have to say that this shouldn't be the course they take?
I think undoubtedly there is suffering in this country. There are conditions which need better research, better care, better investment into relieving suffering. But I also think it's egregious that actually end-of-life care, palliative care, is not funded in this country. We're reliant on 75% of our income coming from charitable donations from local communities. We simply can't get access to the people that are suffering.
But with respect, that is another argument, isn't it?
It is
about how
much.
health is healthcare funding for those at the end of their lives. The question is, if it's unbearable, who are we, anybody, to say that you don't have the right to either commit suicide or to have somebody help you end your life?
And suffering is what it is for that individual. It's not for me to measure that, and that person's distress is their own distress. I think society, as you rightly say, has looked to a change in the law for this. I think my perspective is that society may decide that that is what it requires, but I do not feel that this should be a duty of care for a doctor to do.
And we will go into the work you do at the hospice.
Yes.
Wonderful work that everybody there does through the course of this programme. But I'll put the similar question to you, Mark. You are a Christian as well as being a doctor. Is it your Christian belief that this sort of thing is wrong, or is it your medical opinion that it's not necessary?
Quite simply, it's both. I think there are Christian arguments against assisted suicide, but when I speak publicly, I don't need to use those because the arguments against assisted suicide stand on their own. There are reasons why some people of faith tend more towards them and give them more value, but it doesn't mean you have to have any faith to have those arguments. The main ones that we would use would be that changing the law will put vulnerable people at risk, and also that it's very difficult to actually frame a law so that it can't then be extended. If you think of what's normally talked about in the UK of a 6-month limit for people who are mentally competent, terminally ill adults, straight away Michael would say that that's rubbish, and he would want to have a law where you can, if you feel that you're suffering unbearably, completely defined subjectively.
Well, when you say
then
people
should
can be
have access
taken
to that.
advantage of, explain.
I think we talk about the right to die, and people do have the right to die. Suicide is not a crime. What people are asking for is actually to have the right to have a doctor to help you die, to actually give you the medicine to kill you or to kill you themselves in euthanasia. And Amy's certainly talked about duty there, the duties of a doctor. It changes the balance of healthcare very much when it's going from I have the right to die to you have a duty to help me die. But also for people who are terminally ill, people feel vulnerable at the end of their life. And it's very, when Parliament looked into it on several occasions, they found that the right to die could very easily become the duty to die because a person may feel that they're being a burden on their family, on their carers. More than half of the people...
Can we put that, because it's a conversation, we'll open it up if we may,
course.
but I want to put that to you, Jackie, because you haven't had a chance to say anything yet. I'll ask you about some personal circumstances, if I may, in just a moment. But people feel they are obliged sometimes, is Mark's argument, to go through with something that they haven't thought through properly, deeply, and that they are being, to some extent, or can be taken advantage of.
First of all, there has been a law in place in Oregon for 20 years now, which has never been extended and which has been copied around the world. So we know, and is now available to essentially 100 million people around the world. So we know that you can frame a law which does not get extended and which benefits a lot of people. Secondly, the vulnerable argument is always pulled out first and foremost. There's no evidence that anybody vulnerable has been exploited by this law, and yet it is people with Christian beliefs, which I absolutely respect. People can have Christian beliefs. They're hiding behind the vulnerable law, and that letter from the church, I'm afraid, exposed that for me.
They may not be being taken advantage of by the law, but they may well change their mind in certain circumstances. If somebody does that, and by then it is perhaps too late for them because they've had the Nembutal or whatever it is put into their body. Do you not accept that it would be good to have prevented that? Therefore, on the argument of one death via capital punishment is one too many, therefore you shouldn't have it, that this is open to mistakes.
First of all, I'd say in all the time I've been campaigning around this, I've never heard of anybody who swallowed the stuff and then said, oh, I've changed my mind. Secondly, to turn your quote around, I'd say one death in unrelieved suffering is one death too many. And we know that there are 17 of those deaths going on every day at the moment. So what you've got is a balance between 17 people dying every day in this country with unrelieved symptoms against a notional view that somebody may think it's too late after they've swallowed it. We never know that that's happened. And I would suggest to you that's a rather unequal balance.
Okay, and I don't know whether you know Jackie's personal circumstance. Her brother took his own life. And he took his own life before he fell into such a state that he wouldn't be able to go and travel to have somebody help him to do it. You think if this law had been in place, what was it you actually said? If he'd known he could be in control of his end, he wouldn't have done it the way that he did. So how would this have helped him?
My brother was 60 years old when he got cancer of the kidney. He had seen somebody else in the family die a horrible death of inoperable cancer, despite very good palliative care. And he phoned me up as soon as he had his diagnosis and said, I'm not going to do that, and I want you to help me. And I said, it's very difficult, I can't do that. He had all sorts of wheezes. He was going to, gas himself in a car. He was going to drink himself to death in the snow. And eventually he lost the use of his legs. And he was quite determined that he was going to die while he could still do it himself. And he ended up trying to hang himself and then throwing himself down the stairs. This all happened after I got involved in assisted dying, so I do want to stress that's not why I'm here today. If he had known that he he could choose to go in his bed, surrounded by his family at a time of his choosing, he would never have done that. He would have waited until his suffering was intolerable, because what he was suffering when he did that was not only physical suffering, but the mental suffering of knowing things were going to get much worse. And he would have had control over that if there had been assisted dying available.
Amy, you may want to respond to that. It's a very personal story, and you've seen so many people who are in the most terrible pain and don't feel as if they can go on, but you help them. But I wanted to come to something that you said to one of my producers, which was Canada. You've mentioned Oregon already. So you say in Canada there are stories that people are told that to stay alive would be too costly to the system.
Yes, so unfortunately the system in Canada was originally legislated as having the oral medication, as are proposed in the legislations in this country, but that's unavailable. So now 97% of the deaths within Canada that are through medical assistance in dying, are through lethal injection itself. And it has been anecdotal stories from palliative care physicians in Canada of people who were told that actually the health system does not support the specialist palliative care needs that they have, because that is more expensive than medical assistance in dying.
Can I just try and clear something up here? When you say lethal injection, you don't mean as one imagines or sees it is in the American system where somebody's tied down to a gurney. This is somebody who already would have something intravenous, giving them pain relief to some extent, who then has that pain relief increased. There's nothing...
No, it's not pain relief. It's barbiturates, the poisons that bring about death when you wouldn't actually be dying. This isn't assisting dying. This is assisting suicide. They're not people who would actively be dying at that point, and we are assisting them with medications to stop distress, to stop pain. These are medications they would not otherwise have in massive doses that bring about their premature death.
Does it make them uncomfortable before they die?
There are reports of side effects. People have taken many days to die rather than this being instant. People have side effects of vomiting, can awake from this. It is not as simple as it is being portrayed.
But these are very, very few examples. I mean, I think it's quite ridiculous what you're saying.
There may be few examples, but if a few examples of being told data such as 17 people a day dying in distress, where actually the same commission report talks about 277 people a day not having access to specialist palliative care to relieve their distress and suffering. I mean, if it's few examples, they should not be allowed. Someone to die in that way is not assisting dying.
Can I make a suggestion here? Sorry, Michael, but can I make a suggestion here that you're actually all on the same side? Because you don't really want people to suffer.
Correct.
Yeah. So what is the difference here?
I want the person to be in control. I mean, I'm a great believer in palliative care, and we have an excellent palliative care system in this country. But sometimes it gets to a point where the individual will say, I've had enough of this, thank you very much. I would like a quicker exit. And the best example is in Belgium, where in their excellent palliative care system, the option of a doctor giving a lethal injection is embedded in their palliative care system. So you can ask for that when you've had enough of palliative care. That's as it should be. It's a personal choice.
I do think that people...
Mark, do jump in at any time, and you, Jackie, too. Don't
in
wait for me.
all the legislations where this is legal, the people request this because of social burden and an element of control rather than physical suffering. So we need to draw away from this idea that people want this to remove themselves from physical suffering rather than social burden and control.
Yeah, please.
Which is why I think this is a societal issue and not a medical issue.
Well, we're going to get on to not just those people who want to end their lives, but the people who find themselves in a position of, in quotes, helping in just a moment. But
I think a couple of interesting points have come up. You'll probably notice that the different sides of the table use different language. So I will always talk about assisted dying, which is very specific. It means the person has to be able to take the medicine themselves, as opposed to euthanasia, where somebody might do it to them. But people will talk about assisted suicide, and the people who support assisted dying would contend very strongly that these people aren't suicidal. There was a famous case in California which really turned California around, because they've now got a law for assisted dying. It's a young woman Brittany Maynard was dying of a brain tumour, 30, just married, very active on social media, and she got a lot of attention for her case, which is very tragic, and she's dead now. And she said, I don't want to die, but I'm dying. And I think that's the really important point to take about these people. They are not suicidal. They do not want to die. If you're suicidal, you seek your death.
Jackie, I wonder if I could just come back at you on that. I mean, suicide is simply killing yourself. You're implying that suicide has to mean you're depressed and you're not of sound mind.
Yeah.
And we're not suggesting that at all.
No.
But assisted suicide is the best technical description of what you're proposing for the law in this UK. And assisted dying, assisting someone who is dying, is what happens every day in hospices. Palliative care is assisting dying. You just don't kill the person. And assisted dying certainly goes along with euthanasia, where the doctor gives you the injection. And I appreciate that the word suicide doesn't sit well with people who are campaigning for assisted suicide or assisted dying, but it's still a good word to use, and no one's implying that people have to be depressed.
I believe the best expression is doctor-assisted suicide, stressing that a doctor must be involved to judge the competence of a person who must be fully mentally competent when they decide they want to end their life, and a doctor will assist that person. And I have nothing wrong with the word suicide if it's attached to a doctor-assisted suicide.
Okay. Can we move on to the assistant in this case, if you like, the person who helps? In your case, 5 trips to Switzerland, 5 people deciding to end their lives. You got in trouble with the law. You were cautioned. You didn't end up paying a particular penalty. But how difficult is it for somebody in that situation? You weren't, I imagine, too emotionally involved because they're 5 different people.
Well, one was a close friend.
One was okay, but there's a woman recently who and she's in her 80s, who helped her husband to die. She thought she would die as well.
In this country.
In this country.
Yeah.
And she was threatened with prosecution.
Yeah.
Are you thinking of Anne Whaley?
Yeah.
And her husband, Jeff? I think it's a really good point to raise, and people do worry about that, and for that reason, the Crown Prosecution Service have released their guidance for prosecutors on how the police will look at, or how the CPS will look about whether to bring a prosecution. And I think it's worth saying that virtually no family members are prosecuted. There is a lot of fear-mongering put around, really, for saying, these people are being criminalised. Being interviewed under caution is not the same as being arrested. You're not put in a police cell. It's a police officer coming to talk to you about the circumstances of what happened. And
Were you put in a cell?
The door was left open.
But I'm certain that Anne Whaley wasn't. Often it's an interview that happens often in people's own homes at a time of their choosing. Now they may have been made to feel uncomfortable.
Much straighter, so that people in these situations who are acting either out of love or friendship don't fall foul of the law?
Well, I think it is pretty clear at the moment. You can't put a blanket carte blanche to someone. You can't say, if you do this, then you will definitely not be prosecuted, because you have to look at the individual circumstances of a case. But there are so many factors that the CPS takes into account. And like I say,
that's the British prosecution,
the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK, and I'm not aware of any family members who've actually been prosecuted, certainly not for following the wishes of their family members. And I really think that people like HPAD or Dignity in Dying should make that clearer, because actually family members don't have to worry about that.
But they do worry, don't they? I mean, it's inevitable, isn't it?
But even before you've got to that point, one of the really important things about Dignitas that people don't talk about is we're outsourcing death to Dignitas, and the people.
This is the clinic in Switzerland.
This is the clinic in
Don't call
Switzerland.
it a clinic, please. It's not a clinic.
What is it?
But the thing about Dignitas is you have to be able to afford £12,000 before you can go there.
10,000.
Let's get very quickly correct. What is it if it's not a clinic? It's a place, just simply a place?
It's a place you go to. You see, a Swiss doctor will evaluate your medical records before you go, decide you qualify for the help from Dignitas. When you go to Switzerland, that doctor will see you, not in any Dignitas.
So, but quickly, what is it? What is it called? We know how it works, but
well, it's a facility.
It's a
house.
Okay, it's a place. Yeah. It's somewhere.
It's not a clinic with doctors in white coats at all.
The problem is you've got to have at least £12,000 to travel there. You've got to have somebody who'll go with you and risk the law,
Not nowadays.
Well,
can I just get this out? Can I just get this out? Because Anne Whaley was threatened before she went. Okay, so there are plenty of examples of people, they can't bring the body back afterwards. They have to make 2 journeys, so that's another expense. And you have to go there before you're ready to die because you have to be able to travel. So Dignitas is an answer for some people, but it's a premature, expensive death that involves other people. And we certainly have examples of dignity in dying of GPs who are unwilling, because of fear of the law, to give the medical notes that were needed to people, and so therefore they couldn't travel to Dignitas.
Does it happen in this country, do you believe, that doctors, without wanting to admit it, administer end-of-life treatment, not in the sense that you would look after somebody towards the end of their life, but actually do bring about people's...
Undoubtedly, the deaths go on behind closed doors. And unfortunately, MPs are much too trusting in the fact that someone will see me right when the moment comes. I know a GP who gave a patient who wouldn't go into a hospice a dose of morphine at night. They were suffering very badly. He said, I'll come back in the morning. He went back in the morning. The patient lived on their own. They were dead. He was arrested. His shoelaces and braces were taken away from him. He was put in a cell, and he didn't work for 2 years while he fought to clear his name. So people are afraid of giving adequate doses.
Would it not be a good idea, Amy? I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about the work you do, but I haven't done it yet. Would it not be a good idea to take these fears away from people by making it much clearer, by having a law that allows for assisted dying, suicide, whatever you want to call it?
I think what we do need to remove is the scaremongering. I know there are doctors that have the perception that they have given that lethal medication, but actually all our research shows that actually that does not change the time of death itself. It may provide relief of suffering, so someone dies comfortably at that moment, but it is not on the end of a needle. Actually, I don't know that the cost of people having to go to Dignitas needs a seismic change in the law to make this a doctor's duty of care. Society, as I say, may choose what it wants, but actually the relationships that we build in the NHS, which are quite unique to this country as doctors, that doctor-patient relationship would shift dramatically were this to be a mandated duty of care, that I must have this as one of my treatments, as an option.
Is it because you swore the Hippocratic Oath, and I'm guessing every single one of you at this table did at some point, that you believe it is your duty to keep patients alive come what may?
No, I don't keep people alive come what way at all. That is, I know that every single person that is ever born will die. It's the manner of their death that's important. We help people in palliative care complete lives well, to deal with the concept of uncertainty, to get back some element of control and quality. We're about assisting living, not assisting dying. And that's the work that we do.
But what about this idea of getting back a level of control by ending your own life on your own terms?
Well, I think that is some of the scaremongering that has gone on from people like Dignity in Dying, to suggest to people that their narrative could not be different, that they will have a catastrophic death and that they will die in incredible pain or intolerable suffering. That's simply not the reality that we see.
I'm sure that's not the narrative it certainly isn't the narrative I've heard. It's just an alternative to palliative care. And I do want you to talk about the work that you do. Do you think there is any way that you could ever make somebody who's in incredible pain their life better so that they wouldn't want to choose this if that was their original intention?
Not for every single unique case, but I have done, and I will continue to do so. I have had patients that have been suicidal, that have asked about Dignitas, asked what their options are, have people that want to end their lives. And we've provided good holistic care for them, for their family, for their society, for what matters to them as an individual person, not as a diagnosis.
See, I'm still coming round to the idea that although you're on opposing sides, you're actually sort of arguing, if you like, the same points. Well, we don't have very much time, but
we all want to have good palliative care, certainly. But I think Amy's put the point very well, that when you actually give dying people good palliative care, the requests for assisted suicide are very rare. They don't go away completely, because for some people it's about autonomy, and it's about fear of losing the ability to care for themselves, perform various functions. It's not primarily about unrelieved pain. That is very rare these days. But when we hear figures about 80% of the public want a law on assisted suicide, or assisted
I have
dying.
90% down here.
Well, take your pick. The numbers are very high, but very largely these are what we might call the worried well, or at least a good proportion of those. They're people who don't have terminal illnesses, who just think, oh, I couldn't imagine being in that
Do
situation.
you think the law will be changed? Very quickly, we don't have much
I
time. But
think
Jackie
there's-
first.
There's no doubt the law will be changed. 100 million people have access to it around the world.
Yeah.
There will be no mandated need for doctors to do this. There'll be a conscience clause, of course, as there is with all these ethical things. There will not be a huge number of assisted deaths. We think calculation is about once every 7 years in a GP practice, so it won't be a problem. And I don't think it's for us to decide what it is that makes people to decide they've had enough. It may be pain, but it may be all sorts of
We're
other
running
things.
out of time. I suppose in a sense we all
law
are.
will
But can I just ask you, Michael, as a representative of the oldest person at this table, if your time comes and you can make a choice, will it be to go to somewhere in Switzerland or somewhere elsewhere, or will it be to accept the love and kindness that you might get in a hospice?
I would combine the two. I'm a member of Dignitas. I've been a member for 20 years or so, and I certainly believe that I would like that option because it's good and quick. I've seen how it works in Switzerland. I've seen how it works in other parts of the world. It's fine, and it will change in this country within the next 10 years.
I pick on you only because you've told me you're 88, not because you're looking particularly unwell
Thank you
today.
very much.
Listen, thank you all very much for coming on the programme. It's a jolly difficult subject to talk about, something that you have to deal with every single day, and I know how hard that can be just by listening to the sincerity of everything you had to say. Thank you. Thank you for coming on this roundtable, and thank you very much for watching. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, we hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.